On this vote, the yeas are 205, the nays are 228. The motion is not adopted.
The bailout package was defeated today. Stocks fell off a cliff, the largest single-point drop in history. In the end,
well, they were horrified. They thought that they had made the case that we were on the cusp of another Great Depression, and they couldn't believe that Congress wouldn't approve the money. They were stunned. And it made the crisis worse because it made everybody wonder whether our political system had its act together.
Hank Paulson said he never felt worse than when his proposal was voted down, and he began to show it.
One of the sort of physical reactions he has is he does these sort of dry heaves. It's sort of almost a nervous, emotional, tired, it's his form of sickness, if you will. There's a moment when he goes to the Hill. He's trying to convince these congressional members to pass TARP, and that evening, you know, they bring him a trash can, and then they say, should we get the, you know, the congressional doctor to come? And he says, no, this happens to me a lot.
Paulson's international colleagues could see that he was under enormous pressure.
Il a été sous des moments de stress exceptionnels, sans aucun doute. J'ai le souvenir précis d'une conversation téléphonique que je souhaitais avoir avec lui sur AIG et où il m'a dit je prends ton appel mais j'ai 15 secondes. Et je veux bien le croire. On était dans des périodes de temps extraordinairement courts pour des enjeux énormes.
Ben Bernanke and Hank Paulson warned congressional leaders that if they did not get sweeping new powers and $700 billion, there was a serious chance of another Great Depression. In the end, they got the powers and the money, but the signs of depression started appearing anyway. In the last few months of 2008, signs of economic depression appeared in many parts of the United States. There were over 1 million home foreclosures, the greatest share in California. 2 years later, the foreclosure rate is still increasing.
What he doesn't get right now, he can get from...
Deputy Mark Haybaker of the Sacramento Sheriff's Department used to enforce only 1 or 2 foreclosures a month. Now he has 20 to 30 a week. The owner here had poor health and no insurance, and so lost everything.
Good luck to you folks, huh?
All right,
take care.
Don't move to California, that's all I got to say.
Construction worker John Kesnick is helping the family move out on the foreclosure deadline, piling their belongings onto the sidewalk. He too has been out of work for months.
Hey, just no one's buying any houses.
What's happening to the California dream?
Yeah, okay. It used to be good here. Ain't no more.
Here we go, guys.
Sheriff Haybaker has one of the toughest jobs in the state. He often has to forcibly remove people, and sometimes even has to draw his weapon. He is haunted by the case of one older man who was not going to listen to reason.
Hello? Sheriff! He continually called the bank and made threats to them. The bank made me aware of this. I showed up with another officer. We approached the house and made entry into the house, and when we did, he shot himself, committed suicide. The living room was dark. He was sitting in the living room on a couch. Didn't leave a note for us, didn't leave any explanation at all, and he did pass away the day after that. His family had probably lived there his whole life, and the bank took his house, and he probably felt that he had nowhere else to go.
After being foreclosed, many former homeowners have no place to go and fall into despair. Some have to sleep in their cars. Single mothers Nicole O'Connor and Audrey Shrivener have just found places in the St. John's Women's Shelter in Sacramento. Both had been living in their cars for weeks with their children. Audrey has also been battling cancer.
I've been working since I was 15, so I have a lot of history, but physically I'm just not up to it, right now. And so for the month before I came here, me and the 2 kids were living out of my van. Yeah, and that's scary.
Not many places you could park a car overnight.
That's being a woman by
you
yourself.
know, you've got security running around going, you're not supposed to park here. It's like, well, where are we supposed to go? And you know, you're single woman, pregnant, 7 months pregnant, and you're like, where do I go? Where do I go? I'm not used to living on the street because I didn't know where to turn. You just cry. You're in a small van, and you just want to cry all night, and you just don't know where to turn.
Under government pressure, California banks and mortgage companies hold events like this one in San Diego. Homeowners facing foreclosure are offered one last chance. They line up to talk one more time with bank officials, but there is little room for negotiation. It is exasperating for homeowners like Jack, who did not wish to provide his last name.
They don't do any favors for anybody. It's all about money. They don't care about people. They can send them home, make them homeless, put them in the street. They don't care if they're elderly, disabled, people who lost their jobs or had a health condition or mental health condition. They could care less. They could care less. It's only in America. Rob or feed the rich. That's how it is in America.
The actions of banks during the financial crisis raised the ire of many U.S. politicians.
They don't return your phone call, or they put you through so many hoops that you get so confused that you just give up. And that's the whole idea. Wear you out. Make it confusing, make it very intimidating, and you'll walk away. And then someone else ends up owning that property, not you. So you've lost everything that you've invested in.
The gentlelady from Ohio rise.
Marcy Kaptur went to the U.S. House of Representatives and told Americans to fight back against foreclosures, even by resisting the sheriffs.
What I'm telling people right now is stay in your homes. If the American people, anybody out there is being foreclosed, don't leave. You be squatters in your own homes. Don't you leave. In Ohio and Michigan and Indiana and Illinois and all these other places where our people are being treated like chattel.
I would venture to say well over 75% of the people that get these notices from lending institutions have no clue about how to defend their own interests legally. It is just, it's a tragedy.
On Monday, October 13th, 2008, as the U.S. economy was spiraling downwards, America's top bank CEOs were summoned to an emergency meeting at the U.S. Treasury building in Washington. News cameras caught fleeting images of the arrival of Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan and Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs, John Thain of Merrill Lynch, and John Mack of Morgan Stanley. It was a holiday weekend, and the purpose of the meeting was kept secret from the participants.
David, it's Hank.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson had decided the time had come for radical action. He intended to launch a virtual government takeover of the U.S. banking system by making direct government investments in all major banks. He knew that many bankers would be reluctant to accept.
Paulson has a problem, which is basically the government of the United States can't force the banks to take this taxpayer capital. He wants them to take it because he wants to put capital into the weakest banks, and he wants the financial system to have more capital, because if it doesn't have more capital, it's going to shrink, and that's going to hurt us all. So he has to use his forcefulness to make them feel like none of them have a choice. And he does.
The bankers knew that if they accepted the money, they would also have to accept a lot more government interference in the way they ran their businesses, right down to the size of their bonuses, something they desperately wished to avoid. In the end, each of the 9 CEOs present signed a hastily drafted single sheet of paper. $10 billion of government investment for Merrill Lynch, $10 billion for Goldman Sachs, $25 billion for JP Morgan, $250 billion in all.
To Hank Paulson's own surprise, they capitulated much more quickly and easily than he ever imagined. Literally by 4 or 5 in the afternoon, it was done.
Nice suit there, buddy. Try not to steal any more money.
The biggest welfare check in history had been paid to Wall Street.
Hank Paulson may have had sound financial reasons for doing what he did, but he had no idea what the public reaction would be. Protesters filled the streets denouncing bailouts for billionaire bankers. Paulson is still under fire for his handling of the financial crisis. At congressional investigations, he is pressed about what exactly U.S. taxpayers got for their billions of dollars. Ohio's Marcy Kaptur is determined to hold him to account.
Well, you know, I wish you'd gotten a better deal for the taxpayers. You certainly got a good deal for a lot of your former clients.
I think if you look at what the taxpayer is going to make on a number of these companies, it will have been good. But the biggest advantage to the taxpayer is what didn't happen. And that we did not have a collapse. We did not have double the number of foreclosures in Ohio. And
oh, they're happening, Mr. Paulson. You ought to come and visit us in Ohio and see the results of your handiwork.
Well, I know how terrible it is. I'm just telling you it would have been worse.
That's your best argument. That's not good enough.
You probably don't agree there was a crisis.
I agree it was a crisis of your making for very...
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
The economic collapse of 2008 quickly spread to Europe, and so did the rage against bankers and politicians. The 2 years since the financial meltdown have been marked by constant violent protests overseas. Police have fought pitched battles with demonstrators in London, in Italy, and in Lithuania. Protests in Greece began with farmers and quickly spread to civil service workers and students, all of whom are facing severe funding cuts because of the meltdown. From the very start, European governments stumbled in response to the turmoil. Conflicts first appeared at this meeting in Paris on October 4th, 2008. Banks in Britain and France had already started to collapse, but Europe's leaders couldn't agree on what to do about it. France's Christine Lagarde had proposed a European rescue fund for troubled banks, but Germany's Angela Merkel wanted nothing to do with bailouts of any other country's financial problems. In a closed session at the summit, Merkel sternly told President Nicolas Sarkozy, every country must clean up its own shit. Ironically, that very day, a German mortgage lender suddenly needed a massive government bailout, and it was Merkel who had to write the check. A French newspaper quoted Sarkozy's gloating. Merkel told me each to his own shit, and then she ends up in it. Maybe the meeting failed, but it was not my failure, it was Merkel's. She fell into her own trap. The whole affair was not a great advertisement for European unity.
Et c'est pas un drame. C'est pas d'aujourd'hui que l'on ignore qu'il y a une culture anglo-saxonne, que l'Allemagne a sa propre organisation hollandaise et que les pays méditerranéens peuvent avoir d'autres idées. Tout le monde le sait.
Mais vous savez, l'Europe, c'est 27 pays souverains. Ce ne sont pas des provinces. Ce sont des pays avec leur souveraineté, leurs drapeaux, leurs hymnes nationaux, leurs histoires respectives qui ont souvent été en guerre les uns avec les autres. Et cette Union européenne qui est un véritable miracle depuis sa constitution, elle fonctionne de manière cohérente, consensuelle, cohésive. Mais elle ne fonctionne pas comme un seul homme sous une fédération comme pourraient fonctionner les États-Unis ou le Canada par exemple.
We now know that the only thing that really unified the European powers was anger at the United States. A tug of war played out behind closed doors when world finance ministers descended on Washington to confront the Americans in the first week of October 2008. That critical meeting was chaired by Hank Paulson.
Hank started the meeting by saying, we're in a bad situation here. We have banks failing in the United States, banks failing in the United Kingdom. Some of the regional banks in Germany had failed. It was unclear that the markets would even open on the Monday, and we better deal with this. And that's a sobering conversation.
French Finance Minister Christine Lagarde admits anti-American feelings were running high.